Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha. Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you, and once again, our top story is on India-Canada ties. A fortnight after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau publicly accused India of orchestrating the killing of Khalistani terrorist and Canadian citizen Hardeep Singh Nijjar, Canada's Foreign Minister Melanie Joly now says the country wants private talks with India to resolve the diplomatic dispute over this issue. Nijjar, who was the chief of the banned Khalistan Tiger Force and a designated terrorist in India, was gunned down by masked men outside a Gurudwara in Canada's British Columbia province on the 18th of June. Now, Reuters has quoted the Canadian Foreign Minister as saying, "We are in contact with the government of India. We take Canadian diplomats' safety very seriously, and we will continue to engage privately because we think diplomatic conversations are best when they remain private." Ironically, it was Canada that first chose to go public with its wild allegations against India without offering a shred of credible corroborative evidence. And now the same country is seeking private talks with India. Significantly, this comes after New Delhi told Ottawa, in no uncertain terms, to downsize its diplomatic presence here by 41 diplomats. That's been reported by the Financial Times. Currently, Canada has 62 diplomats representing the country at the High Commission in the capital and various consulates across India. Not only that, after the initial tit-for-tat diplomatic expulsions by the two countries, India also suspended its visa services in Canada, citing a security threat to its staff by Khalistani elements. Not only has India rubbished the allegations by Canada as absurd and motivated, it has also time and again accused Canada of harboring pro-Khalistani extremists and terrorists, many of whom are wanted in India for various crimes, including targeted killings in Punjab. And unlike Canada, India has provided concrete evidence in the form of multiple dossiers to back its claims and seek action by the Canadian authorities against these forces that have been allowed to operate freely and with impunity from Canadian soil for decades. Canada has brazenly looked the other way every time India has raised concern over anti-India activities in that country. In fact, Ottawa has turned down every single extradition request made by India over the years. At last count, at least 25. In fact, it is worse. The Justin Trudeau government has been known to pander to this particular constituency of Khalistani and anti-India elements for the sake of cynical vote bank politics. A well-known Khalistani sympathizer, Jagmeet Singh, and his party even support Trudeau's minority government. And adding insult to injury, Trudeau decided to accuse India of foreign interference. Needless to say, India is deeply upset and with good reason, and has therefore decided to take certain tough but necessary measures. The decision to ask Canada to withdraw a sizable number of its diplomats is part of that response. One that could in fact deeply hurt Canada's education sector, among other things. Remember, about 41% of foreign students in Canada are from India. In 2022, Canada welcomed 5 lakh international students from across the world. Of these, 2,26,450 students were from India. That is a huge chunk of the total international student population in that country. And these students bring in a lot of money for Canadian universities. Now, after the initial shoot and scoot and reckless diplomacy by the Prime Minister, dealing a massive blow to India-Canada ties, now the Trudeau administration seems to be singing a somewhat different tune. Just yesterday, Trudeau said Canada is not looking to escalate the situation with India and will continue to engage responsibly and constructively with New Delhi through this extremely difficult time. A few days earlier, he had said, Canada is committed to building closer ties with India. It is extremely important that Canada and its allies continue to engage constructively and seriously with India, given its growing importance on the world stage. He said India is a growing economic power, an important geopolitical player, and as we presented with our Indo-Pacific strategy just last year, we are very serious about building closer ties with India. So the question is Canada softening its stance towards India after taking a hardline position? Is the Trudeau administration trying to extend an olive branch to India? After making public accusations, why does Ottawa now want private talks with New Delhi? Will this move help ease the diplomatic tensions that have been running high? There is one thing that will help for sure. That's if Canada finally agrees to act against pro-Khalistani elements on its soil. Will Justin Trudeau take any action this time? If he is truly serious about building closer ties with India as he claims, surely it is time for the Canadian Prime Minister to walk the talk. Also remember, India is still waiting for the elusive evidence that Canada is expected to furnish to back its claims against New Delhi. All right, let's dissect these new statements that have come from Canada with our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Lens tonight, former Indian diplomats, Ambassador Suresh Goyal and Ambassador Manju Seth. Welcome back. Great to have both of you on Global Lens. Ambassador Manju Seth, let me start with you. Like I said, ma'am, it suddenly now seems like Canada is singing a somewhat different tune. One day, Justin Trudeau says, we are very committed to building stronger ties with India. India is a great geopolitical and economic power. Another day, he says, we don't want to escalate the situation with India at all. Now, the Foreign Minister of Canada is saying, we want private talks with India to resolve the diplomatic issue. Now, of course, many are pointing out, and rightly so, that, this has come after India asked in no uncertain terms Ottawa to downsize its diplomatic presence here. It looks like it's hurting Canada. What do you make of these new statements? And isn't it ironical that a country that decided to go public with these allegations against India without furnishing any tangible evidence is now seeking private talks?
Absolutely. It is quite absurd the way Canada has handled the situation. And I feel they are now realizing it's hurting them definitely. When so many diplomats at one time have to go, I've been asked to leave. It's not easy. The whole functioning of the embassies and the consulates will be put in trouble, in jeopardy. So now it is hurting them, and now they are talking of quiet talks. They should have done that on the very first occasion, instead of raising it so publicly and expelling our diplomat from senior diplomat from Canada. So that is so they are they will only, I think, continue with these double standards, so to speak, and now they realize that India is not going to, despite them saying we want good relations, so India wants them to walk the talk. You can't just go on saying we want it but do nothing from your side and expect the other country to to give in every time to your indicate your whims or your directives. So definitely, I think this has been a clear messaging to the Trudeau government that if you wish to continue like this, then we are also not going to have any consideration for you or your diplomats. So just downgrade them. We need to have parity. So I think it is a message where, and it has hurt them, and that is why we can see the changed approach to the whole issue. And of course, the main thing that, as you mentioned very rightly, Neha, we need to see action taken against the terror-related, activists, so to speak. I think there was someone was saying, why do we keep calling them Khalistanis? They're very much Canadian. So I think we need to call them Canadian citizens who are indulging in all these kind of terrorism-related activities and who are indulging in trying to target our diplomatic staff there, our high commissioners, our consul generals publicly. It's not something that they're doing it quietly and spreading the word around. They are actually publicly doing this, and it's a kind of hate campaign. And I think the Trudeau government should realize and should understand that that is not acceptable. Something similar would happen in India. Would they accept it? I'm sure not. And especially that they are promoting a kind of divisive and agenda on Canadian soil against India, and trying to say that we need a separate to break up India. So I think that these under the garb of free speech, we cannot allow this. And I think India has taken the right step. And I think if more pressure is required, if they still continue with this absurd allegation of saying credible allegations, I think India needs to even toughen their stance even more. And in these private talks, I think India will convey, categorically that this is not the way to conduct bilateral relations. Neha.
Absolutely. Perhaps a lesson in diplomacy that the Trudeau administration needs to learn. And you're quite right, ma'am. These are Canadian citizens who are hurting India's interests. It is as simple as that. Ambassador Goyal, let me ask you. India has obviously rubbished the allegations that have been leveled against it by the Trudeau administration as absurd and motivated. Now, do you believe New Delhi is upping the ante by telling Ottawa, we don't want a majority of your diplomats, please recall them, you can have them back? And does Canada now look like it is a little rattled and is making a feeble attempt to extend some sort of an olive branch to India?
Neha, where is the olive branch? I would like to ask anybody who says that Canada is offering the olive branch to India, where is it? A private conversation, diplomatic level conversation, but most of the diplomatic conversations are private. They are not conducted in public at the top of your voice in the media. Media only reflects part of it. Therefore, I think we need to look at the whole thing from a different angle and we need to give it a different narrative. Let me put it this way. Trudeau may be a fool, but Trudeau is not an idiot. Trudeau is the Prime Minister of Canada, and therefore, when he does something, he does calculate his political interest and he does calculate where Canada should be going. Now, please do remember in this context, and I'm not talking about the Khalistani terrorist angle. It is obvious to everyone, and the fact is that I've been saying it at the top of the voice, it is a Canadian problem, let us leave it to Canada to resolve it. It is not our problem. We don't have Khalistani terrorism in India. It exists in Canada, let them deal with it. If you want to kill your citizens through the Khalistani weaponry, by BR gas, do it. You will get hurt. But anyway, leaving the Khalistani angle apart for the time being, let us see where actually the matters are. Trudeau returns from Delhi to Ottawa. And the very first thing he does is, he goes on the floor of the parliament and accuses the government of India or agencies, etc., of killing, assassinating Nijar. He promises to give evidence which he doesn't give. I agree with you completely that that was not a desirable, that was not something that was wanted by anyone at all. But the very first thing that you should think about, do you think Canada can act on its own in taking such a step? Ask a question. I don't think Canada, being the northern neighbor of the USA, being a member of G7, being I5, can act on its own. It must have been encouraged, and if not encouraged, it must have been given a kind of a tacit yes to do so, number one. Number two, immediately after that, what do we get? We get calls from our friends to cooperate with Canada. And we are told that they are coordinating and cooperating with Canada even till yesterday. Even till yesterday, we continue to get the call for cooperating with Canada. Are these calls for cooperation with Canada just purely pious statements by our friends, or do they mean something else? Neha, I think we need to look at the fact that Canada is not just a bilateral relationship. Our bilateral relationship with Canada, we can ignore for the time being, because I don't think there is so much of content in terms of bilateralism that we need to worry a great deal, even though jeopardizing any relationship, bilateral relationship, is a problem, because to put it back on the rails takes so much more effort. But even if we ignore the bilateral part of it for the time being, we cannot ignore Canada as member of G7, as NATO. Please do remember that at G7 and NATO, Canada cannot act on its own. They work by consensus. They take decisions together. And we are, India, with the kind of a strategic equation that we are looking at in our own region, China, Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific, Quad, all that, Africa, if you look at the entire strategic picture around us, can we ignore G7 completely? Can we ignore the USA completely? I don't think we can. Even if you don't like the UK, we cannot ignore UK or Australia. We have to work with them. We can't simply say, all right, we don't need anyone at all, and we will act on our own. I don't think India can do that. Even a superpower can't do it. We need to make adjustments. Therefore, what I'm saying here is, let us take a complete view of what is happening. Let us simply not go by the machismo that we are a sovereign country and therefore we will do what we need to do. Yes, we will do what we need to do. We will keep our interest in mind, but we cannot ignore the world. We cannot ignore important relationships around us. And therefore, once again, I come back to the thing, let us try and understand what is happening and why it is happening and whether we can do something not because of Canada, but because of what we want in our strategic neighborhood. Neha.
So you've said some very interesting things, Ambassador Goyal, and I want to spend some time dwelling on this. And of course, I'd love to have Ambassador Manju Seth's thoughts on what you've just said. But before that, just to clarify, since my question to you was, is there some sort of an olive branch? Of course, you're right. Canada hasn't taken back its allegations against India. The only thing I was referring to was some of the recent statements that Justin Trudeau has said, saying we don't want to escalate the situation with India further. India is a very important partner. We are committed to this relationship. We want to build stronger ties. India is a great geopolitical power, etc., etc. Ambassador Seth, I think Ambassador Suresh Goyal is very clearly referring to the United States of America here. I know he's not taken any names, but, it's very clear what he is driving at. He says a country like Canada couldn't have acted alone in the manner that it has, taking on a major emerging power in a democracy like India so publicly, leveling these allegations. And yes, we will have to remember that apart from everything that Justin Trudeau and his foreign minister may have said, angering India and triggering this diplomatic dispute, India is getting virtually daily reminders from the US administration. You must cooperate with Canada. We must get to the bottom of this. This is a very serious matter. From President Biden to Secretary of State Antony Blinken to NSA Jake Sullivan to John Kirby as recently as yesterday, they are all issuing reminders to India every single day as to how serious they consider these allegations to be. And I think that is exactly what Ambassador Goyal is talking about. What are we to make of it, ma'am?
I agree with Ambassador Goyal on that. It is obvious Canada is not acting alone. It is quite obvious. Of course, a very important element of this is because of the government's precariousness with the support of the NDP, and that is an important contributor to him taking this on. Otherwise, because they must have put a lot of pressure, the NDP must have put a lot of pressure on him to do something. And though it's 3 months that have, after 3 months they're coming up with this, but it must have been around in the making, and maybe they held their peace till the G20 summit was over. And I think what Ambassador Goyal has said holds a lot of credibility, let me say. It's not a credible allegation, but a lot of credibility is there in the statement.
Glad you've clarified that.
So that is, it's a very likely and most probable, reason for what has happened, and the timing. I think India was told, I mean, this is the messaging I feel, that it's a message to India. Don't think, okay, this has gone off well, you got your G20 success, but G20 success was a collective success also. India got some credit for it, but it was a collective thing, and nobody wanted the G20 to not succeed. So I think that apart, that's why they held on to taking these kind of things. I think that could be one of the reasons. And obviously, the US has this great propensity to be friends and enemies at the same time. So a lot of people are using this term frenemy.
Frenemy.
And so they are in that situation, and it's quite telling the way each one of them, as you mentioned, has been saying at different levels in the US administration allegations are serious, you must cooperate, you must participate in the investigation, and you must, all these kind of homilies and directives to India. And we urge India to participate. Why are they not urging Canada to act against these elements? I would feel that they need to tell Canada that, look, your soil is being used by your citizens to target India. But I think that obviously is not on the agenda to help India out or to really end terrorism. As I have said before, also they say my terrorist is a good terrorist, but I'm sorry, your terrorist is a good terrorist, but our terrorists whom we designate are the ones who are the real danger. So I think that approach continues. And we have seen it happening right since, the last so many years with Pakistan, with other countries. It's always been this approach. And I think since they are the most powerful country, they tend to take that, we are the rule makers, we will decide, what rules need to be followed by whom. I think that approach, and as Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, these double standards and this double approach of these countries and the feeling that they decide on how the rest of the countries, or what the rest of the country or the rest of the world should do, I think is very telling, and it's applicable in this particular case as well. And we can see how and now suddenly they must have realized that they've gone a little, too ahead, and India has taken retaliatory action, and that is hurting them. And so they have decided, I think, to rectify matters. But of course, I don't think there's any olive branch at the moment.
All right. I think the word frenemy does describe rather well the relationship that India and the United States have actually shared over a long time now. Many would say the relationship status is that it's complicated. Ambassador Goyal, now that you've set the cat among the pigeons, we need to keep the focus on the United States for another few moments. Before I ask you a specific question that I have on this matter, tell me this, sir.
Just ask.
Am I wrong in saying that it was Henry Kissinger who once famously said that being an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but being a friend of the United States can be fatal? Was it Henry Kissinger who uttered these famous words?
I don't remember. I don't think Henry Kissinger would ever describe anybody as friend or enemy. Therefore, I am a doubt. But either way, it's an interesting saying. Yes. So, Neha, what is
the United States playing at, sir? Come on, tell us. What are you not telling us? In fact, is the question I should be asking you.
Okay. Let us put it this way. Having been a diplomat all my life, in fact, that's the only thing that I know, even if it's very laid back kind of a profession. The fact is that in diplomacy, you do not make any friends. You try not to make enemies because you never know when you may need to talk to each other. The same thing in the case of Canada. And my strong feeling really would be that when Trudeau says that private conversations, it is simply because very often you are able to make compromises. That's a very strong word, but you are able to really listen to people when the conversations are private. Otherwise, you are playing galleries always to the media and to the others, and you get prejudiced. You get actually affected because you care for the public postures more than what actually you think it should be. That is just way of really how I look at diplomacy. Coming to the USA, enemy and friends and everything. See, in the real world, I mean, we have been a non-aligned country for several decades. Ultimately, when the Cold War ended, we slowly got away from it, called it strategic autonomy, and then slowly multilateralism, plurilateralism, and everything. Because even during the non-aligned world, we kept the options open to play with one or the other, depending upon where our interests were. In this case also, I don't think we can imagine that we can simply say that we are always right and you are always wrong. We cannot, even if we don't agree with it, we have to accommodate interests of the other partners. Similarly, in this case, we need to define where our interests are. Our objectives, if I don't want to call it interest, our objectives are more direct. our objectives are that China is getting increasingly assertive. Despite all the professions to the contrary that the economy is going down, this and that and everything, China is becoming more and more assertive in our immediate neighborhood. We need to be ready for a China which can be a militarily dangerous entity for us. We have faced it across continent. I do not doubt it very much that they will come in the maritime space. They have come into Bangladesh. They have come into Sri Lanka. We need to be prepared for it. And if we want to be prepared for taking China on, we need to look at the asymmetry of power between India and China. We cannot simply say that, all right, we will take on China. We can say it. It's bravado. But we need to calculate. We need to basically look at our assets. We need to look at our strategy. That's the only way. And in that strategy, it is important for us to have some friends on our side. We had Soviet Union on our side in 71. We need to know who will be with us in case such a situation arises in our neighborhood. That is point number one. And therefore, the USA is important to us. G7, NATO is important to us because they are the only people who can really be with us in case of a confrontation with China. That's a fact of life. And now coming in that context to Canada, I know Canada, I said right at the beginning, Trudeau should not have done what he did. But he must have been incited. Why did he do that? I mean, he knows very well that if you make a declaration on the floor of Parliament, it will not be easy to backtrack. I think he's realizing that he has really bitten more than he can chew. Or is it the reverse? I don't remember it. But whatever it is.
Ambassador Goyal, I take your point.
Yeah.
I take both your points. Before I go back to Ambassador Seth, I must ask a follow-up question of Ambassador Goyal. I take your point that Justin Trudeau may not have acted alone in this. I also take your point that yes, India of course needs to act in its own interest, countering or at least keeping China in check is a major priority for India. China is a growing threat at multiple levels, but then doesn't the same apply equally to the United States of America? It may not share a border with China, but it is not without reason that the Biden administration has gone out of its way in recent months to invest in the India-US relationship. They have wooed India. They have been wooing Prime Minister Modi, whether it was the recent historic state visit or, agreeing to that joint statement at the G20. It is because not because the United States has suddenly discovered its love for India. It is obviously because of its own geopolitical interests. So then let me flip this around. If it is important for India to be on the right side of the G7 and countries like the US to keep China in check, well, the same applies equally to the United States. They need us as a countervailing force against China. Therefore, my question to you is, why do you believe the United States of America is issuing daily reminders to India asking it to cooperate with China on allegations that haven't been proven with any evidence?
It's a very, very good question, Neha, and I will be very, very brief on this. You are absolutely right. Both India and the USA need each other. When we really make the balance sheet of who needs what, we look at our assets. We see, all right, USA needs India. What are the other options that USA has if India doesn't work with them? Are there any other assets? What about Taiwan? What about Japan? What about Japan if they build up their own security dynamics? What about Southeast Asia, ASEAN? So what I'm saying here is that they all make their computations and calculations depending upon what their own assessment of the others are. So in this whole mix of us and others, we'll work out. Like in our case also, we don't depend entirely on the USA alone. Why do you think we continue to buy oil from Russia? We can't give up on our relationship with Russia. Why do you think that we want to keep on developing our equations within Africa? We got African Union into G20. Why? Therefore, you are absolutely right. We all work on the equations with each other. We all need each other. But in that assessment of who needs what, let us not become over ambitious. Let us really remain realistic, very to the ground, and see where we are and what more we need to do. I think, lastly, I would say we still have a lot of ground to cover to become a Viksit Bharat by 2047. And we need many, many other countries in that process. Neha.
Okay, one can't disagree with you on that, but I have seen how, like a good diplomat, Ambassador Goel has cleverly circumvented the question that I was asking him. Therefore, Ambassador Manju Seth, I will try my luck with you. Would you want to hazard a guess as to what America's play here is? You know, a few days ago, I called it running with the hare and hunting with the hound. But here, Ambassador Goel seems to be quite convinced that Canada not only didn't act alone, it may very well have been egged on by another country in this entire saga. And therefore, if that country is the United States of America, which otherwise has gone out of its way to woo India in recent months, just what is America's play here?
I think America's play, of course, is to safeguard its own interests foremost, and to also send a message to India that yes, we are friends, but please don't think that you are, don't give yourself too much importance. I think that is a messaging, because they don't want, like China, they thought China would always listen to them, but China stopped listening. And then they don't want a similar situation with India, because America wants to retain its numero uno position in the world, on the world stage. So I think this kind of approach, we've seen it before also, even during the Ukraine war, there's a lot of pressure on us. So I think this is the US approach to balance out, or with its friends as well. Maybe with the G7, it's a different, sort of approach. But with other countries, yes, we both need each other. We need them, they need us. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, I think the US feels that no one should think that they can challenge the American position or its or those of its allies. Let me put it that way. So that is one of the reasons, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is the Trudeau government could fall if the NDP withdraws its support. And here, I think China and our neighbor Pakistan, I think their government or their agencies are also active in all this, I think, in pushing this whole narrative that is going on. But yes, the US definitely seems to have had a role, though why it is doing so is not absolutely clear. We can only guess. And I think I feel this is the reason that they don't want, they want India to be with them, but friend enemies, as I said. That's their approach to keep everybody in sort of balance, let me put it that way.
We may be friends, but we will keep reminding you every other day of how powerful we are. That's interesting. I have a thought on this, and I'm just spitballing here. I wonder what the two of you think about this. Ambassador Seth, let me start with you. Do you think this might have anything to do with the G20 summit and the fact that the joint statement, which made absolutely no reference to Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, obviously left certain countries unhappy, even if towards the end they agreed to come around and put their stamp of approval on that joint statement? I'm just throwing it out there.
It's a slight possibility, definitely, because it left Russia happy. Russia was very happy with that. And so that may have, put off the other countries who were pushing for the inclusion of naming Russia, naming and shaming Russia, so to speak. And because India got them to agree, and because I think everybody collectively did not want, not only India to look bad, but also the entire G20 would look bad if there wasn't a proper communique, because in the last year since it's been established, right, ever since its first summit, there's always been a joint statement, a joint communique. So I think if that had not happened this time, it would also reflect on the entire G20's ability and relevance to look, as they portray themselves, as the premier forum to look at economic and other issues, where now, as we know, the agenda has expanded to many other issues. and many other current challenges which the world faces. So I think all these, it's a combination of all these factors which have determined the whole G20 communique coming out. And it may have offended people because they were very adamant, some of the countries were very adamant that, including I think China also to some extent, for a different kind of wording. But yes, not naming Russia was a victory for India, and Russia was very happy, but it may have put off other people on as to why Russia is not being named, and even in Indonesia it was named and shamed. So it may have, and so as I said, it's a messaging also to India that please don't think it's only you are special or you've done something great. I think it's a messaging, and that is why soon after he went, for 3 months they've done nothing. For 3 months they've not been able to find out who were the actual killers. I think that is
the timing was very interesting. Many have pointed this out, that it had been close to 3 months, and the Canadian authorities had not managed to make a single arrest. They still haven't. And Justin Trudeau, as soon as he goes back to his country after attending the G20 summit, and of course after, I guess, also feeling humiliated here, decides to make that statement. So just what was at play here? All right, Ambassador Goyal, you started this. I'm only taking this forward. What are your thoughts on my what are your thoughts on my hypothesis?
Okay. Let me let you in on a little secret about negotiations on these kind of documents, and I speak on the basis of my own experience in the United Nations. See, whenever these important documents are negotiated, ultimately there are a few areas where there are disagreements or differences, and you try and narrow it down to whatever you can. And at the end of it, depending upon how important the document is, you either take it to the leaders and say that, look, this is the best we can do. And if you want to get the document the way you want it, speak to your counterparts. Ask them to agree to it. Or if it is not important enough, we let it go. Now, in this particular case, I have been reading a lot about the mechanics of negotiations by Amitabh Kant, etc., our own people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, all that. I'm quite convinced that at the end of it, when we agreed on the kind of formulations about Russia, not mentioning Russia in the context of the war in Ukraine, etc., there was a clear signal given to all the leaders that my leader, when I say my leader, I mean Prime Minister Modi, is very keen to get an outcome. This is the best we can do. Talk to your leaders and see whether you want to get stuck or you want to leave it here. And none of the leaders who wanted to go back from here after upsetting the apple cart, they agreed, considering, and that is another little secret, none of the document of the G20 is enforceable. Therefore, even after agreeing to the statement, tomorrow if the USA, or in fact it is already happening, if today the USA or UK says, look, we have to do what we need to do in our own interest, so therefore we supply weapons to Ukraine, let the war continue, there is nothing that can prevent them. They will do it. Therefore, having secured the outcome, which is not enforceable, if today the UK said that, all right, we gave you what you wanted, so where are we now? Therefore, what is happening now is the price to pay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I've said enough.
that was succinctly but eloquently put, and I think I agree with you there, Ambassador Goyal. Thank you really for putting this entire issue into perspective for us. And on that note, Ambassador Goyal, Ambassador Manju Seth, it is always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. On that note, let's slip into a quick break here. Don't go anywhere. There's plenty more on the other side. Stay tuned to Global Lens.